What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Microshift Project Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Nick Valinchak. That's Nicky V if you're nasty. And I can't tell you how many times I've almost referred to this as the Minecraft podcast, because that's all my son does. So it's on mind. We've seen the movie 66 times at least. I'm pretty sure I know most of it by heart at this point. But before we get into the topic at hand today, I have just one question to ask everyone out there. Is Nick Valinchak looking good today or what? That's right. I've got my Christmas t-shirt on because it's August 14th. Yes, I did have to look to see what the date is because I know the month, have no idea what date we're on. But it's Christmas season for me. But more importantly, that sentence has such a significance to me. And it's the topic of our show today. Now, I want to take you into the time machine, and we're going to go, trying to math, so give me a second here, 17 years, 16 years, 18 years, somewhere in that vicinity back. I'm freshly clean out of the rescue mission. I've been about a year at this point sober, and I reconnect with my best friend Kyle. Now, see, Kyle and I had a falling out because he was amongst many people who I wronged during my days of living the drug-addicted lifestyle. He was my best friend. I got to watch the ums. I noticed that when I was going through anyway. He was my best friend. I did some stuff to him. I did a lot of stuff to one of our other friends, and he actually confronted me one night at a bar called the Sandbar, and I could tell that he wanted to do something. But there was still, while he was face to face with me, not a fear that like Kyle was not afraid to fight. Even if he thought he was going to lose, he was still going to do it. And at this stage, I don't think there was any question to the fact that I probably wasn't going to win that battle. But I think he stopped short because he saw the kid that he grew up with and that, you know, he was friends with. And so his father, who owned a construction company, came to the rescue mission and put in a bid for something. And I happened to see his name on the guest sign. And so I called their office and I talked to his dad, Dan. Now, Dan was my first real supporter in terms of trying to help me get off of drugs. He took me to my first NA meeting, and I wasn't ready at that point in time for what recovery was, but it was never lost on me, and I always appreciated the fact, even in addiction, that he did something he didn't have to do, and he tried to help me stay away from some of the mistakes that he made, and I'm still appreciative of it to this day. So I talked to him for a little bit. He's super excited to hear that I've actually been able to straighten my stuff out. And I asked him, hey, you know, can I talk to Kyle? Is Kyle there? He's like, yeah, I'll patch you through. So he puts me on the phone with Kyle, and I could hear the trepidation in Kyle's voice where he was happy to hear I was okay, but there's a little bit of a sense of maybe doubt, for lack of better terms. Also, some of those feelings that he felt he was harboring, right? Things that had been pushed down were being brought back up to the surface. And it wasn't necessarily a contentious first call, but it also wasn't a like, hey, we completely settled everything and we're good moving forward. But I was surprised as the days moved forward that he started texting me. I gave him my work number, which was the only phone I had at the time, and he began to text me, and we started conversation. And he told me, you know, and we're 22 years old at this time, still probably a little bit old to be doing it, but it is what it is. He told me that some of the people we used to do backyard wrestling with had started doing backyard wrestling, and they have a ring. And so it was like, oh, wrestling was the thing that I always wanted to do. That was like the number one priority. In fact, for the vast majority of the time I was at Canfield, I think that I would probably be the person most associated with professional wrestling out of everybody that was there. It was my whole identity. In fact, I think at one point, my entire wardrobe just consisted, much like it does now, of Christmas t-shirts and high-end luxury brands, which is just the weirdest range of possible clothing options, but I digress. Most of what I had were Stone Cold Steve Austin and Diamond Dallas Page t-shirts. That's how much I loved wrestling. And I found out as we were doing this process that some of the guys that were doing backyard wrestling were also training out in, I always forget the name of the place, by Ravenna, whatever. Let's just call it Ravenna. And so I went out there one time, and it was in a garage, and the ring was janky. The people in charge, or the kind of guys who were doing the training, you could tell like this was not a professional setup at all. And I began to sour on the concept because like I felt like if I worked with them, it was going to probably hold me back because I'd have a stigma on me from working with people who like didn't go through the proper channels to get the training themselves, whatever it might be. But it was at this time that a lot of us discussed, hey, you know, it can't be that hard. These jabronis are doing it. We can get a ring ourselves and we can hold our own show, and it will just be a bunch of us backyard wrestlers doing it. And so, I mean, I still remember sitting on the computer and probably on GeoCities. That's how far back this goes. I remember building a website. I remember stealing HTML from other websites and crafting it to fit what I wanted to do. And I actually learned how to code websites by doing just that. Man, the 90s and 2000s, such an interesting time. Quickly, though, we realized, like, hey, there's no longevity in running a show with a bunch of backyard wrestlers, because it turns out as good as we thought we were awful. Who would have guessed it? And the thought process began to turn more into like, well, let's find reputable people, people who are professionals. And so we found some people who are localish to Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and we started to kind of build a show out of those guys and remove the untrained from the show. And more or less, we're like, okay, I guess we're going to try to run a wrestling company. But then it began to dawn on me that, like, this is what everyone else is doing. Everyone else is using guys that are just from, you know, whatever's within an hour driving distance from themselves. And while there were talented workers in those areas, this is kind of hard to explain. They didn't have necessarily like that. If they had visibility nationally, it was not that it was in a negative capacity, but it wasn't something that people were clamoring over wanting to see. And the what I thought was business part of me thought to themselves, like, you want guys who are hot, that people want to see now. And so I began to think, like, we need to go outside a little bit more of the talent we're bringing in. And there were effectively two areas, I think, at this time that were like maybe three, with Los Angeles being one of them. But, you know, you're not driving Los Angeles to Youngstown, Ohio, and sure as hell aren't flying people out at this stage in the company. So you had to be within driving distance. And luckily, Philadelphia was like the hotbed. Yeah, it was probably like 5 years after Ring of Honor started, and it was an expanding indie company. We went to a show and actually I think what it was is Kyle and I went to a show in Cleveland, and it was, you know, just the best actual in-ring performers that we had ever seen. And we were like, yeah, a lot of the talent that was really good in Pittsburgh and Cleveland were just getting started. They've gone on to do huge and great things now, but we needed something that was substantiated and also that people really wanted to see. And at this point in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, like, the Philly guys were coming around here and there, but it wasn't consistent. And so I decided, okay, we have to use some of these guys. And so as I went online as the booker and started doing my due diligence on what was out there, I took some of the guys from the Ring of Honor show, and I stumbled across this guy who was about a year, maybe 2 years into his professional career. But oh my God, it just clicked. When I watched him the first time saunter to the ring in pink in purple boas, headbands, Macho Man sunglasses. He looked like a transplant from the 1980s, which to me is the heyday of professional wrestling as we know it. I loved that era of wrestling. Yes, the Attitude Era with Austin and The Rock, but man, there was just something different about the Rick Rudes, the Mr. Perfects. And those are the guys I wanted to be. I never liked Hulk Hogan. I was never a fan of like the baby faces. And even with Steve Austin, he was the anti-baby face who people liked because he was the opposite of everything that they had seen with Hulk Hogan for so many years. He became just something new and fresh, and that's why I attached to it. But as a performer, I always wanted to be the bad guy, because to make the good guy look really good, you need a really, really good heel. And this guy, smaller side, and unfortunately wrestling hadn't hit the point it had yet where guys like Daniel Bryan were able to elevate the smaller guys into being taken seriously on a national level, and promoters being willing to put their whole company behind them. And that's really what I feel held him back. But when he got into the ring, he was the commander-in-chief, and you knew it. When he tilted his head, took off the sunglasses, chewing on his gum, and looked at the crowd and said, "Is Larry Sweeney looking good today or what?" And I butchered it. It's actually, "Is sweet and sour Larry Sweeney looking good today or what?" And the crowd would just buy in, full-fledged boos. He had them eating out of the palm of his hand. And when the match went on, he was sound in the ring, put together a good performance, knew how to work the crowd. Wow, it's one thing to be able to work the crowd when you get on a mic. It is an entirely different thing, in my opinion, when the show actually starts, when the match actually starts, and you have to work them as the match is going on. And I watched 3, 4, 5 matches, 5, 6, 7 interviews, and I was sold. I looked at him and I said, "That's the basket I'm putting all my eggs in." And so up to this point, MySpace era, I'm sending these guys messages on MySpace, talk to some of them on AOL Instant Messenger, but this guy, I needed to talk to him, because when I talked to him on MySpace a little bit, and then I was like, "Hey, I want to talk to you because I want to pitch the whole idea." And I got on the phone with him and I told him, we talked for somewhere between a half an hour and an hour, and I pitched this is what we want to do for like the first 20 minutes of the call. And then the last like 20 or 30 minutes was just like two friends talking. And I've been a con artist and I've been a skeptic. So of course my initial thought was, he's humoring me because he wants the payday. And especially when someone's saying they want to build their company around you. And it was green of me to say that. I shouldn't have done that, because that puts all of the leverage in his court. And he never did anything, right? He never like, "Hey, I need more money," never anything like that. So I don't want that thought process to come off like I'm saying he took that information and used it against us. But as a business owner now, I would never give that much leverage to someone I was trying to work with. And we would talk on AIM, and I had started going to indie shows because my home life was an absolute wreck. I was married to someone who I met at the Mission, which, let's take a pause there. Kids, don't marry people that you go to rehab with, that you end up at a homeless shelter with. It just doesn't tend to work out too well, because there's such a high relapse rate that it tends to go south very quickly. In fact, I think it's pretty realistic to say that if two people come out of addiction at the same time and get into one of those people is likely to go back by the numbers. That's just the reality of the situation. And so my wife at the time started using narcotics again, and I never had the temptation to do anything like that, but I hated her. So I wanted to get out of the house more. So I started to go to indie shows more. And this was a time where the Pittsburgh company, IWC, was starting to use Larry Sweeney a lot more as well. So I would run into him there. Promoters kind of were willing to be a little more reasonable with each other in terms of like, access to talent and things like that. So he and I would genuinely talk, and a lot of it oftentimes wasn't about wrestling. It was about personal stuff, sports, whatever it might be. It just felt like I was developing a relationship with this person, and he was like the opposite of what I would be. Here he is. I think we're both heels. Like, I would have been a bad guy, but he's like the loud, flashy. I always envisioned myself as being like the big, I'm going to bring you pain, don't have to say much, let my action do the talking type of performer. But I think at this point I kind of realized, even though I was still really young, I mean, we're talking 22, 23 at this point, I think I realized that the window of professional wrestler for me was not likely to happen. I didn't have money, so there was no ability, honestly, for me to go pay someone to learn how to do it. And I didn't have, my job took up a lot of my time because I was trying to work as much as possible to stay away from the home life that I hated. So there were just a lot of things, I think, that a 23-year-old Nick couldn't understand a way around. A 41-year-old Nick, that's an entirely different story. If I was the person back then that I am now, I would have said, to hell with it. I'm liberated. I'm going to figure out a way to do what I need to do to live out my dreams. And I don't take lightly. That's why whenever I have an idea or I get passionate about something, or I hear someone else who's passionate about it, I dive in, roll the sleeves up, figure out what you got to do to make it work. You can't just sit back and say, well, maybe, whoops, maybe next time. Sorry, this didn't load. You figure your stuff out. But I wasn't there. So I think for me, I started living vicariously through him because I always felt like I could be successful, or you want to think at least that you could be successful doing the thing that you love. And I was seeing him start to get the fame, starting to get more opportunities with bigger companies. And I was excited for him. But unfortunately, and this should come as no surprise to anyone, that while Kyle and I really loved wrestling, we lacked any true business knowledge. And it is also a point where social media wasn't what it is today. And I'm not saying it's easy for someone to open a business, because social media gets harder and harder all the time. And the algorithms now really work against you unless you're putting money into the system. But we had no idea what we were doing. And so by the time we worked to the show where we made Larry Sweeney champion, we basically made him champion. And the next time Kyle and I talked and determined we're still going to try to give this a go, the first decision we had to make was, we can't use any of this talent from Philadelphia anymore because they're too costly, because they are developing followings and they're involved with some of the, larger regional to national promotions. It doesn't make sense for us to be expending that amount when we really haven't seen it have that dramatic of a difference on our attendance. So we had to make the difficult decision that, like, great, we just crowned this guy champion. We're going to take a few months off. We work out a really good deal with a local bar where we're able to do some shows for basically like pay me $2 a person that comes in or something like that. So it's like a real sweetheart deal. They're making their money on the back end with concessions and alcohol sales and stuff like that. So they're fine with how the arrangement works out. Plus, we're able to get in and out before their bar scene really gets going. So they basically get a free event. It's just like the ideal situation for a business like this. So we have the uncomfortable conversation. I tell him, we do it in person, and he's disappointed. He understands business. This is how things go. We kind of talk through it. Like, I'm going to kind of miss hanging out with you. We always had good conversations, and you were a fun guy to talk to. Let's make sure we stay in touch. And we did. He started to get more attention. He was, they kind of moved him out of an active participant role in the wrestling scene. And he was in the bigger companies like Ring of Honor doing more management, doing more announcing. But I was super excited for him because here he is, like, they've found what I feel like is the perfect role for his strongest suit, which is his ability to manipulate the audience, right? And he can tell a story so passionately, and And man, I was just like, I would have loved to be the one to really fully harness that and take it as far as it could go. But if I'm not able to do it, I'm happy that he's doing it. And then he was just gone. And what I mean by that was all of a sudden, one day, he's just not on the wrestling scene anymore. And we are actually starting to figure things out a little bit better to where we're at least breaking even and sometimes making a few $100s on an event. And at that time, that felt like a massive win after the first year, which was a massive loss. I had talked a lot. Like I said, we got to know each other, and I'm never going to make claims to things like I didn't travel the road with him. There's a different type of brotherhood that gets formed when you come through the ranks with someone, when you are driving 14 hours on a Thursday night, 8 hours on a Friday night, 8 hours on a Saturday night to get back home. There's a whole different kind of relationship that gets formed. And while I'm one to kind of make things more grandiose than they were in my mind, I know that we had a good relationship that transcended wrestling. And I had really started to see results working with people at the rescue mission. In fact, I worked as the warehouse manager 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever it was, Monday through Friday for like a year and a half. And it was really unfulfilling for me because I just had this ridiculous life-changing experience. And so I wanted everybody to have that experience. And I wasn't able to find that same release and satisfaction working at a warehouse as opposed to working in the trenches at the actual residential center. So I had decided that I was going to move positions and start working on the residential side of things, which was an unpredictable schedule. Oftentimes you'd work 16-hour shifts 6 days a week, and it was treacherous, So I gave up a life of stability to get in the weeds a little bit more. But I was really starting to come into my own and being able to talk to people who were going through things and see the changes in their lives start to manifest in front of me. And for people who are involved in situations like addiction recovery and things like that, you can start to see that moment when it clicks for someone. And to know that you had a part of that, especially after you've been on the receiving end of it, is like the most awesome feeling in the world, right? It is a satisfaction, a confirmation even that everything you worked for, everything you went through, and then everything you worked for was all worth it because you've been able to positively affect the path of someone else's life so that they could stop living in the chaos that you knew all too well. And I do remember having conversations with Larry Sweeney and him telling me from time to time, like I feel like I'm really going through it. I'm having a hard time with this, that, and I'm not going to. I never really wanted to ask, and this is part of the problem, and this is where I'm going, because up to this point, it's all been about how people affected me, right? How they helped me further my growth, my ability to reconnect with people, to come back to a normal type of existence. And when he would say things like that to me, whereas I would be able to tell someone at the rescue mission, like, oh, this is this is the advice, this is how to handle it, whatever, I would almost not downplay, but I would kind of try to change the subject because those people were all a captive audience. And I know how it could feel when you're dealing with something and someone is trying to help you and you're not ready for that help, right? And so I didn't want our relationship to sour because he felt like I was always trying to help. And so it put me into an almost comatose type situation where I just wouldn't talk about it. But I would send him messages on, MySpace, and I think we end up moving into the Facebook era. We become friends there too, and I would send him a message. Sometimes he would respond back, "Hey Nick, trying to hang in there. Stuff's tough right now. Hope you're good." I would try to gauge when I felt like he was ready, and I would just be like, "Oh, hey, I'm going to give you a call," and I'd call him, and sometimes I'd get a call back. It would seem like we would play phone tag a lot, and I worked a lot of midnight shifts at this point, and wrestlers that tends to be a lot of their lifestyle. I remember right around the time he came back to wrestling, him answering, and it was probably the last time I ended up talking to him on the phone. And I just told him, like, "Hey man, I see you're kind of getting back into things." We were in this weird space where things seemed like they were good. Somebody would come through and be like, "Oh, I have this, 6 shows I want you to do," and whatever. "We're going to do this, we're going to do that." And then it would peter out, and I've always felt like I was chasing my tail. We're really trying to make this work. We're trying to find a better business model so that we can try to have the best of all worlds, where we could use the best talent, have shows that fans are excited to come to, and it just never seemed to work out. But I know it was at a time where we were kind of felt like something was building. He was getting back into it, and I talked, and I was just like, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this, whatever." And he was like, "Oh, that's cool. How's everything else been going?" And boom, we have a 20-minute conversation just about life and how things are going. And it was still superficial though. And I could feel the times presenting themselves for me to try to advance the conversation and just ask some of the stuff that I felt so comfortable doing face to face with people at the rescue mission. But I would never do it, right? I would always just give myself a reason, like, this is going well. Like, you don't want to make things complex because you don't really know that he has not opened up to you to express the depths and where the areas are at, and you don't know exactly how to handle the issue. So just don't do it, right? There could be another time in the future, or maybe the problem will just resolve itself and everything will be fine. And, I didn't hear from him again after that. And I know he was training to come back, but, I think one thing almost everybody can relate to is there's that point where you have the last conversation with somebody, and you're friends, you're really good friends, and I don't know, you have a conversation, your circumstances change. A lot of times maybe it's I moved out of the area and I started my career, and if I'm not in the area that you're in anymore, I'm checking in every once in a while, and then it becomes longer and longer and longer. And then you don't hear from them, or you have your interest change, your views on life change. Any number of things kind of separate us from the people who we knew and loved at one point in life. And that's where I thought this had kind of worked to. I had started college. I was I'm sure at this point we had the downer of somebody coming through and be like, "Oh, the whole thing that we had worked out with you is not going to work out after all. So we have to pull back on how we're conversing with the talent." It's a roller coaster. Business is a roller coaster. Business now is still a roller coaster. Nothing is as easy as it ever should be. And then I want to say in 2011 at some point, maybe around October, I can't remember offhand, my buddy Drew, who helped me run CWE, called and was like, "Dude, did you hear what happened?" And I was like, I oftentimes wax philosophic, and I was like, that's one of the worst things you can call and say to someone, because there are literally an infinite amount of possible answers to what that question is, right? It could be anything. I don't know. Why don't you just tell me, as opposed to setting me up for a question that I'm never possibly going to be able to answer. And he's like, "Oh, dude, Sweeney's dead." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, he's gone." And I remember having like a fluttering of emotion, because I think there's a lot of times where human beings get selfish first immediately before everything else, and they think about like, this is the impact that this has on me. I'm never going to be able to see this person again, whatever. Poor me. I think it's just a natural human reaction when you hear news like that. But I went through a series of emotions, from being mad to being sad to hearing that, is sweet and sour Larry Sweeney looking good today or what, in my mind, and smiling. And it stuck with me for like a couple of weeks. And I remember being at work at the Mission with my buddy Lee Taylor. And Lee is, 20, 30 years older than me, probably more 20 than 30, 25. And, I'm talking to him about this, and I'm just like, I'm in a really bad headspace because, I had someone who I consider a friend, but is not like a best friend or like a close friend, pass. And I feel like I shouldn't have this amount of feeling, for lack of better terms, 2 weeks later. Like, I feel like this should have passed by now. And he's asking me questions, and he's like, "Well, why do you feel bad? Like, what is it that you're holding on to?" And I had to stop and think about it. And it was almost like another mirror moment for me, because I was like, oh yeah, because I come to work every day and I have people who are going through things, and they're in front of me and they talk to me and they tell me what they're going through, and I can draw on my own experiences and talk to them and try to help them. And I can see that I've helped people. But with him, I never had the courage to really ask those questions. And he's like, "So really what you're upset about is that, not that you couldn't save him, but that you were too afraid to breach the subject with him." And I was like, yeah, I think that subconsciously, and people who are in recovery center, work in recovery centers, have been around people who try to help people, things like that, substance abuse counselors, things like that. You feel like you want to be able to help everyone, and when you can't do it, you feel like you let yourself down. But at least you tried. I was beating myself up because I was too afraid to try. And that feeling, I remember when he kind of said it back to me, you just had that heart sink feeling where you should have done more, but you didn't. And I'm not sitting here, I do not believe for a second that with 100% certainty, if I had conversed about it with him, that he would have taken whatever experiences I could have tried to relate to him with and made it out the other side. But I can say with 100% certainty, he never had the chance because I was too afraid to do it. And so his impact and his influence on me is that reminder that you should not be afraid to say the things that need to be said. That the conversations and the little interactions we have on a day-to-day basis, the ethos of what I've built my speaking career that is just starting, this podcast, my life around, is that those little interactions that we have on a day-to-day basis can sometimes yield the biggest impacts. And I can say with confidence that this was the last time that I ever let that keep me from saying a word to a person when I could tell they needed to hear it. Because we're all human at the end of the day. And I know that there were times where I wasn't willing to hear it in that moment. My whole origin story of recovery starts with a conversation that at the time I was not ready to hear. But it got the ball rolling to allow me to recover, to get to a point that I'm doing what I'm doing today. So I will never make the mistake again of being too afraid to talk to someone about what they're going through, to really, really talk to them, not superficially, but as someone who wants to see the best for them, who wants them to be able to fulfill all the dreams that they've been working towards. So when I open up a podcast and I say, is Nick Valinchak looking good today or what? It's a reminder to me, inside of myself, to keep fucking going and never have that fear of what you say to someone being something that they will not like to hear from you, that they don't want to have to think about their problems, but to just do it anyway. Because if even if it cost you the relationship to get that ball moving in their life to where they could get themselves into a better position, it's a conversation worth having. So tonight, I want everybody to go out, hit the internet, go to YouTube, search Sweet and Sour Larry Sweeney, watch a match, listen to a promo, and just enjoy the body of work that a tremendous performer, a great human being, and someone I was proud to call a friend, and even more excited to be able to say had an influence on my life and what I'm doing right now. To Larry Sweeney, Alex, everybody misses you. You've left an indelible mark on the wrestling business. I still see your fans and your friends posting so consistently about things you would have enjoyed if you were still here with us. And for everyone else, if you know of someone who is in a situation like I'm describing now, and you're hesitant to say something to them, just do it. For all these people, it's never too late to get your house on straight. Just try to give them the nudge they need to be able to move forward. Thanks for listening to the Microshift Project podcast. I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart for the people who do listen. I would love if you would hit the subscribe button, listen to future podcasts. Follow me on social media. I'm Nick from CWE or the Microshift on most sites. Until next time, 12 large, brother.